Welcome to the Val Valley Model Railroad's first DCC video, and we're going to call it Project Dash 8. I got a Dash 8, well actually I got two of these off the internet, and as I figured, they were marked used, and when I got them they're noisy. They run okay, but they're noisy, so what we're going to do is we're going to swap out with this brand new chassis here that I also got off of eBay, and we're going to put DCC in it. Now for our project we have soundtracks. I guess they call it an economy decoder, but I've used one of these before in my SW1500 here, the one that switches Pearson Yard, and I put a speaker in this critter, and it's just incredible. I love that engine. Not only does it run good, it sounds great. If you can get over the wire between the two, it's a wonderful thing. So I went and got a GE prime mover decoder here. This is a part number 882004. It's an Echo PNP for diesels. It's a 2 amp, which will be more than enough for what we have, and it happens to match the prime mover that we need for the GE. And offhand I can't remember which one it was here, but it seems like it's the GE FDL 16, and there's another one, and I think it's like an E or something like that, but close enough for what I'm doing. And besides, this is an early Dash 8. It's not one that's been overhauled or revamped in their failed program similar to that of the SD60. I believe it was. Anyway, so our plans are we're going to take this shell off, and we're going to take this frame apart, and we're going to put this decoder. When it's all said and done, it's going to be mounted right here with some of this wonderful sticky tape. Now, the first thing we have to do is make room on our bench. We're going to take this frame apart, and we're going to have to isolate the engine, because on these old Spectrums, you'll notice the frame's divided here. And literally, this is the rail on this side, and this one's the rail on that side. So we're going to have to insulate the frame's pretty much insulated, but we have to insulate the motor from the frame, and we're going to have to change the pickups. And when I tear it apart here, you'll get a better shot. The pickup is really just a brass, for lack of a better word, spring that presses against the frame. And yeah, you can kind of see there's a rubber trace right there where it's been rubbing. So we're going to tear the frame apart. Once I get it apart, I'll show you how I put the leads on. Some notes about tearing this apart. Let's see, I got to turn it the other way around so you can see the screws. There's a screw here. For those of you who haven't done this before, there's one here. There's one in each nose and one over in the rear. And then also, once you get those out, underneath this insulating tape, which insulates the motor from the frame, there are two clips that have to come off, and we'll show you those each step. So I'm going to stop the camera. Okay, so I got the 4 screws, one here, one here, one here, and one here out. Now as you're working on this, you want to be careful not to lose the plugs. In these holes, there's a little square plug here, and it's hard to see. And that's actually the threaded part that the screw screws into, and it works like a clamp. As you tighten it, it draws that together, which draws the frame together. But you don't want to lose those. Okay, so our next step is we're going to remove the screw here that holds the truck in place, and this screw. So we'll be right back. Okay, so now I got the screws out of here and the back side, or the front side in this case, and we're going to remove the trucks. And to do that, once the screws are out, you just simply lift the frame and pull it out. We're going to set the trucks aside for a moment. Oh, didn't get that screw all the way out yet. Okay, so I've removed the insulating jacket from the motor. That one actually came out pretty easy. It's quite gooey though, unfortunately. The last one I did wasn't quite so gooey. And this right here is the clip that you've got to remove. They're not focusing because our cell phone wants to be a pain. But the idea is to usually use a pair of needles pliers or a screwdriver but you want to take this, and it just slides off this direction here. So I'll go ahead and get one of those off. Okay, I got that clip pretty much ready to leave here. If I could learn to hold the cell phone and tool at the same time, that would be really cool. But there it is. And here's your clip. Now there's two. There's one on the right side and one on the left side. Once you pull that other one, the frame's going to want to fall right apart. So let me finish that. Alright, I got both clips laying out here. Now save those because we're going to need them to help hold the locomotive together when we do a reassemble. Now, literally, look at that. The last one didn't fall apart quite that easy, but there it is. Now, I was going to point out, but our motor here is a little gooey from our sticky stuff. So I'm going to remove the arrow here. Is supposed to indicate down on the frame, or at least that's my assumption. On the 3 or 4 of these I've taken apart, that's always face down. We want to be careful with this wire here. This is what the insulating tape was holding down, so it didn't do that. We're actually going to end up soldering wires to those to make leads for our motor. So I'm going to take the motor out, and at this point it literally just, and you don't have to worry about any springs or that going flying. The motor just lifts right out. So I got to clean up my motor, and I'm going to set up first a little soldering, and we'll be right back. Alright, we're back, and now we're going to look at a little thing on the frame before we solder leads on the motor. There's this metal tab. On this one it's marked 2. This is the, I guess they're going to call it number 2 side of the frame. This area right here needs to be insulated. That is technically where this spring will try and rub when we put it back together again, and we want to keep the frame isolated. So really all we have to do is put some electrical tape over this or glue something thin. The last one I put something a little too thick on here, and the frame, I didn't think it really bothered, but it made the frame so much wider it wouldn't bolt back together again. It was a kind of a pain, had to redo it. On this lower one here, you will see that I've already placed 2 layers of electrical tape over it, and I got a little tab running up the side. Electrical tape is supposed to be good at 600 volts per wrap, and I'm assuming that's per layer. I put 2 in there just to be safe, because we just don't want the bottom of this Mr. Springy here making contact with the frame and shorting us out anymore. So we're going to put a little bit of tape there, and I'm going to go put some tape on here, and then I'm going to solder leads onto this here, both sides of the motor there. So I will be back in a flash. I had a little thought. I didn't say anything about it before, but the tape goes down that tab and comes over up to this edge of the frame here. I wanted to cover the bottom of that frame, because if you look at the way the motor, this one shows it on top, but when you look at the other side, it's actually facing down for the other one on the other side, and this part here will be near the bottom of that frame. So on both of those, I ran, you can't quite see it on that one, but I ran the tape right down the tab and on this part of the frame here, so the bottom of the motor doesn't sit on it and short it out. When we're done, the frame will be completely insulated, but we don't need things getting stray electric running around and shorting out a $70 or more decoder. That could be a serious pain in anybody. So my next step is I'm going to solder some leads on here. If you aren't really good at soldering, or you would like a little brush up on it, please see my YouTube channel. I have a video about soldering, and it shows some pretty cool techniques that'll get you soldering in no time at all. Got my solder wires soldered to the leads here. You can see my little arrow showing that that's down to the frame, and the other side here, you can see I soldered them up. That's kind of hard. It's not focusing really well. Let's try that. There you go. There's a little focus. Well, it was. Anyway, these wires are kind of long. I always leave them a little... Okay, so they're super long. Better to have too long at first than too short. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about those wires. I run a small computer shop, so I got these junk computers around, and you may have one in your house because, well, let's face it, we've all bought computers. And what this is a chunk of old IDE cable. And usually they're like 25 pins wide, I believe. They're, you know, about yay wide. And they either have a fat connector with pins or slots at the end, depending whether it was a floppy drive cable or a hard drive cable. But anyway, I've been using these for a multitude of things. I use them for, obviously, in my locomotives because the wire is small and it holds the amperage pretty well for what we're using. I also use these, believe it or not, for brake lines. I cut them off in 3-length strips, you know, 3 at a time. I split the end just a little bit, crimp them with a pair of needle nose pliers to make them flat like the Glad hands. And here, I'll show you what one looks like. I know it's off topic, but and there you go. There's a set of air brake wires made from, or air brake hoses made from a set of IDE ribbon cables. And anyway, I like to use them. And as an electrician, it's always to have enough wire, or more than enough. It's really a pain to have it short. So what we're going to do is drop this in the frame, and this will go pretty easy. Remember, I've got my insulating tape on both sections, and I got a wire stuck in the frame. So when I put this motor back in the frame, it almost just falls in, just like that. Now all I got to do is put the other half of the frame on, and then we'll have the motor secured. Now before I do that, I got to remember to put back each piece for the wheels. These are the supports that hold the trucks in place. So we'll put those in place real quick. Alrighty. And then we've got these little white supports here that held the fuel tank. And we got 2 of those. There. Now I'm ready to thread the other half of the frame on. And I'm actually going to run those wires right up through the split in the seam, in the frame. So let me get the other half of the frame on here. Okay, we're back. I got the frame assembled, and there's a couple things I want to cover. I said before I was going to run the motor leads right up through the frame. They're not pinched, they're pretty loose here. I'm going to run the truck wires the same way. It's the same way I did the last engine. I did want to talk a little bit about these darn screws. This one and the 2 here. It's not official that you are assembling a Bachman, or in this case Spectrum locomotive, unless you've cussed at the frame several times. So you will find putting the frame back together and keeping this insert and the 2 white ones here in the bottom in place while doing so much fun. The other thing you'll find is that the screw here that goes in this hole, this back side, it's almost like a screw itself, but it's more like a nail with a head, and the inside of it's threaded. And the way they work is the screw threads into that, and the 2 pieces pull the frame together. And so while you're screwing in the front here, you may have to have something in the back to push that, I don't know what you call it, the socket or receptacle part into the frame this way. You'll find it helps. And if you find one screw is a real pain, like this one just would not go in at all, I went and put in all the others, and then the last time I put that, it went right in. But I'll tell you now, it's probably the hardest part of the locomotive, is putting that darn frame back together again. And once you got that done, you're on easy street. Okay, my next thing is, you're going to see here that this lead is awful long. And you're going to see that if I get the camera back right, it's going to touch the frame if I'm not careful. Now I soldered the wire starting at the top, and this wire runs all the way down the length of the lead. I made it kind of long when I soldered it. So I'm going to trim it right about here just to keep it from meeting with that frame. Now that frame is going to be insulated from our trucks when we're done, and from the motor, but I don't want to take any chances. If one side got hot from the motor or had electric current to it, it could jump up and touch the decoder or some other wire in some way that we don't want, and that could be bad. And since I'd like the locomotive to last for a little while, we're going to take some little precautions, especially just a quick snip like that could save us trouble and only take a few seconds. So we'll go snip that. And here you can see I've trimmed the offending little critter off. Whoa! Nothing like using objects to support things that aren't made for it. But I trimmed this little guy here off, and he's pretty good. He's not going to hit the frame. I probably could have even soldered him on top of the motor, but I didn't want to get near that brush, especially since the shell will just push that down nicely like that, and it'll behave. Okay, so now it's time to set the frame aside, because for the most part we're done with him, for a little bit anyway. So we're going to shuffle the bench around here and look at our trucks. Alright, pardon my objects holding things in place, but it's hard to hold a cell phone, point at things at the same time. Alright, now the way the Spectrum trucks work is power is transmitted from the wheel to a wiper here on the back side of the wheel, which is actually a copper strip which is bent here. And this is really like a spring, and it has obviously fallen down, but the spring, which is going to be really hard for you to see, is right here, and that rubs against the frame. So we're going to change that. We're going to bend it straight up, and then we're going to solder a lead to it. So let me go get those bent, and then we'll solder up some leads and we'll take another look at it. Alright, we're getting ready to mount the decoder here, and if I can get my buddy the phone to focus. Alright, so what I wanted to point out was, it's neat, they got a little F here that marks the front of the decoder. And we know that the front of the chassis here has this notch because that's for the low nose. And here you can see I've sanded this piece really nice. So I'm going to put little beads of super glue, not the length of the piece of tape I'm going to put in. And I'm going to put a piece of double sticky tape on there. And then I'm going to mount this. And then we'll get ready to solder up our leads. Alrighty, we got the double sticky tape mounted on the frame, and we're going to let it sit a little bit so that super glue will dry. That'll only take a few minutes. And we got the front with the F marks facing forward, and it's not a huge deal. Probably won't affect a whole lot, but it would be nice to have the front headlights work with front. We can go in and change that around in programming, but it's easier if we just do it right. So the next thing I'm going to hook up will be the trucks, and they go to each outside tab here we're going to solder. So I'm going to trim each wire, and then I'm going to feed it up through the frame and solder it in place. And then we're going to take a look at the motors, wires, and then we're going to look at speakers. I haven't talked much about the speakers. I have plans, two of them that'll fit. And it's a joy because of this tight shell, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I got the front trucks hooked up, and I've left ample wire left so that the trucks can move freely. Ooh, I got that one a little tight when I ran that screw in. Probably should have said something about that earlier. Don't run these screws in real tight. You'll freeze that truck right up, and your locomotive won't make the turns and derail. Anyway, neatness does count. It takes a while to get really good at neat being wire. I'm not what I would consider super neat. I'm just okay about it. So my next thing is I've still got these two motor wheel wires, and these here are the back truck wires. They're connected. These two tabs in the middle here will be for our headlights front and rear, and we'll take a look at those after we've tested it with the sound. So these two here are our motor, and then we've got two up here in the corner I think are sound. But so now I'm going to run my lines over for my motor, and then we'll take a look at that. Alright, we got our motor soldered up, both front and rear trucks. Now notice I got a little extra wire here. I can pull that down into the frame if I want, but I'm being conscious of these two contacts because I got to solder an LED in there and one here for the headlights. Before we do that, we're going to put speakers and we're going to test it. So the very first thing we're going to do is test it before we go any farther. I want to make sure the thing actually works before I get it all assembled. As you put the shell on and everything, you find out that it doesn't work, and it's kind of a bummer. And sometimes that's where we call it a night. So let's go see if this critter runs. Alright, got our monstrosity, or our abomination, whatever you want to call it, on the tracks. Now, Just a side note, I wired my layout like it was DC or regular DC with blocks. I did this so that when you get a short in a section of track, you turn everything off and you slowly turn the blocks on one by one, and when the power pack finally shows the short light, you know it was the last block you turned on. And you can turn off locomotives so they don't always sing and make noise, or like when you're rerailing it. So, without any to do, that is in block number 3, and, oh, sorry, block number 4, different locomotive. Oh, look, we got a light. Gee, that's cool. Alright, so, I've got address 3 programmed into my MRC, and let's see what she does. Oh, look at that. Just crawls along like a pretty little locomotive. Quiet, too. I'm happy. I am very happy with that. Now all we need is the speaker, right? That's our next step. And I wanted to talk a little bit about speakers. So let me shut the block off so I don't get zapped again picking that up. I don't know why I got a little bit of a zap there. Alright. Now, I did some work and some experimenting with these shells. And this is a shell from a different, same Dash 8 but different. I'm going to end up pulling that circuit board out of there just because I'm using my own LEDs. And I have them here. This is an LED I get on eBay. I get them by the bag. I don't know how much I pay for them. But they already have a resistor in them for 12 volts. And these are bright whites, which would be nice and cool. But already having the resistor in it makes it so much easier. I have 2 small ones here that are white, and that yellow one I'm thinking of using for a cab light. We'll see, I may or may not. It sounded like a great idea at the time, but the sister engine that will be running with this, it won't have a cab light, I don't think, the decoder. It was a cheaper decoder, just no sound that I put in it, so it may not be able to have a cab light. So that's still in the open. Now we're going to talk about speakers. I got 2 speakers here. Actually, I got 3. Alright, the first one, this is an MRC. I got another one still in the bag. I brought this up so that I could tell you the part number. She is, oh boy, I can't read that through the phone. And it would help if I looked at the side that maybe the part number is actually written on. Yeah, that would help you out a lot. It's an 18mm round speaker. Now, what I wanted to show you is, I talked to you earlier about that yard engine, and let me punch him up here. It's an SW1500. It has a Soundtrax decoder in it, another one just like this, and it is so loud. The speaker it has, which is actually in the dummy unit attached to it, because there's like no room in an SW1500, but it's twice the size of the speaker we're going to use. I had to turn the volume way down on the thing because it was so loud. I'll give you an idea. My hope is that because this speaker is only half the size of that, probably at full volume it'll be just fine. But I'll give you an idea here. Locomotive 2212, speed step 128, and we will wake him up. To do that, I gotta line the switch for him. The switch cuts out the power on the yard engine there, and we'll wake him up here. As you can see, he's got great sound, man. He just... Oh, going wrong way here, Sean. Man, I love those sound decoders. So my thought was, because this decoder was half, or the speaker was half the size of the one that I used in here, that turning the volume all the way up should make the difference. If it doesn't, I'm going to use this one. Now, after doing a little bit of testing, we found that this speaker here, this one will fit here fine, actually, with the wires facing backwards like that. This speaker, which is the one we want to use, is actually too thick to sit here. It hits the ceiling. It's just not a lot, but it is a little thicker than that. This speaker is a Digitrax. It's the stock speaker that comes with their decoders, and this is an MRC 18mm. Now, I figured that it will actually fit in that frame. I'm going to have to move my wires around a little bit, and it's actually going to fit up in there real nice. It'll either fit there or back here, depending on which spot I can get her into. Or she'll also fit, cheating, hanging upside down in the cab. So we really don't have a problem mounting it. But before I went through all the trouble of mounting it, I thought we would test it. So that's our next goal. And I'm actually going to use the one out of the bag for the test. Or am I? Because she's got a plug on her. And yeah, that's I believe that's a speaker plug. I'm gonna, no, that's actually, as I look for the instructions, check that. That would be a bad thing to do, Sean. The instructions here show, oh boy, show that that is for the current keeper plug. So we won't be hooking a speaker to that anytime soon. So we will just go and solder this with long leads into the terminals marked speaker and for our test. And we'll see what she sounds like. Probably come up with the wrong motor scheme at first, but this way we get an idea of volume before we go much farther. So this is kind of exciting. Alright, so I've got my speakers temporarily wired in. We're sitting here, the block's off. And we want to find out if this speaker is going to be viable for this project. I don't know, I'll let you tell me what you think. So that was startup, but speed steps right here. I think that's going to work great. We'll turn it up a little bit, but yep. Now we just got to get that mounted good. I got to shorten that speaker line. That's terribly long, but that'll be the next step. Shorten up our radio speaker. We're test fitting our little speaker here, and I've played with it a little bit, and we've come to find that, boy, it was easy getting it in there with available fingers. It will actually fit under the frame. And you can't see because my big fat fingers are in there, but it will fit and just clear the drive shaft and just clear the flywheel. So that's going to be its home. And the nice thing is it's got all that open space underneath here to project the sound out of the locomotive. So that's going to help tremendously. And then we're going to take and shorten up our wires a little bit because they got to come up to here, or up to here, and we'll straighten them out. And then we'll take it for a quick test drive again. Once to make sure nothing's grinding on that speaker. And once we've done that, we're going to start working on our headlights. I was sitting here at the bench and I was looking. This was the original frame from the shell that I'm going to use. And I got to looking at it, and it's different than the other frame. It's got a brace right here, and there is no brace here that's allowing us to install that speaker. And I got to looking at it, so if you had this particular frame, you just take a Dremel and lop that baby off on both sides. I think you'll be fine. It'll be no different than the frame I have. And it's kind of odd because I got 3 different frames here. I've got these two, and I've got the newer version, which is really something. That looks more like an Atlas. I'll pull that out and show you in a second. So this is the newer version. I should flip it around so it matches the other 2 frames, and then we'll see that there's a huge difference in this alone. We've got see-through grates. You got separate steps that you got to apply, all the handrails. I will be building this engine later, but I wanted to do one first. This is going to get DCC, the same board. And the shell's weighted, man. It's got strips in here for weight. This is hefty. I've got the cab off in a box. We set this aside, and you'll notice right away there's a huge difference. Looks like the same motor. We've got a circuit board here that spans, and you'll notice the black frame here is completely gone, and you get to really looking, and it looks like an Athearn wheel set. It's the Athearn design for the clip that holds them in place. Either that or it's a proto, because the protos are pretty close to an Athearn too. I like this much better. I've run this test run it on DC because it does not have a decoder in it right now. It does even have a quick plug for a decoder. I may just pull that whole board out of there and solder in one of mine. I'll have to maybe I'll print a 3D bridge to go across here on my 3D printer to support the decoder. But I'm looking forward to this project. This is going to be a gem when it's done. Because when I test ran it, I had to use a 9-volt battery to the tracks with my DCC all switched off and all the blocks closed. But it ran like glass. It was really sweet. So I'm looking forward to this. But it is interesting to see the difference in the frame. You've got no post there. And there's probably some other similarities I haven't seen. Here we've got a post. And in this version, which is the newest version I guess, they completely redesigned the frame. The shell, like I said, the shell details are really something. The shell weighs, good Lord, almost as much as the old frame. It's real heavy. But I like that see-through with the grill. Odd they didn't make that one see-through. But there's a lot of details I've got to go on this. And that's going to be a real good project. I got my speaker mounted. I learned something. Hot glue doesn't work on that frame. I just forgot about the oxide. It really doesn't like trying to stick to that oily mess. Or a combination of plastic, it would just peel off and fall out. So I put a little super glue on the case of the speaker there, and then I held her in place, and then I put a little bit, which is still seeping through the frame there, to help hold it in place. So in about 10-15 minutes, that'll be there and never come out of there. I mean, you can see there's clearance between the drive shaft, and there's just enough clearance between the flywheel. It's a good thing the flywheel doesn't move, other than rotate. I mean, it doesn't wander left or right or something like that, or I'd be in trouble. But yeah, it's going to fit just fine. While that is drying, I thought we'd talk a little bit about LED lights. Some of my trains have white light LEDs in them. Let's see here. We'll take a good look at this engine right here. Fire him up here. He'll boot up. He's kind of loud. Locomotive 8. Lights on. There they go. Now, this particular engine has a yellow LED in it. And you can kind of see the number boards. It's hard to see, but I can clearly read the number boards. They're not blinding out. They actually look pretty cool that way. Bring it a little closer to you. Okay, so those are yellow ones, and some of the LEDs ones we look. We're going to zoom in with the phone. That big white blob. Oh, hell, you can't see it very good. I'm sorry. The lead unit, we'll take a look at that. Hey, look, we can see it better. This locomotive is another Bachman. This isn't Spectrum like what we're working on. And it has a yellow LED in it. It's running a lens decoder, I believe. I may change that. This is the other Dash 8 that I did. And it has one of my bright LEDs in it. Bright white. Now I don't like the way the cab lit up. I'm going to pull that apart next and paint the bottom of the LED so it only shines out the front. And maybe I'll put there's like a cardboard cover that goes over the LED to keep the cab from lighting up as well. I don't mind it lighting a little bit, but that's just too bright. I mean, like this is kind of cool with the yellow, but that's just a bit on the bright side. Alright, back at the workbench. My headlights will be 3mm white LEDs. I get these on eBay, and they've already got the resistor in them. And so that's going to make hooking these up really a breeze, because you got 2 contacts here, 2 contacts, well, in that mess, which I have to straighten out yet. But so what I will do is I will end up either hot gluing this in the shell or super gluing it. I've been known to do both. and once it dries it'll just be a matter of connecting the black wire to the negative terminal here and the red wire to the red. And I'm still considering maybe putting a yellow light in the cab. This one doesn't have an interior. That really new version has an interior in the cab, which is pretty cool, and I got some ideas that are formulating for that. So that super glue should be dry fairly soon, and we'll be able to get on with our project. Alright, we've got the LEDs secured and mounted. You can see that there, it's just this one, the front headlight is tucked underneath the fiber optic here, and again I trimmed the paint off the part that was just going to shine in here. Hopefully it won't light the whole cab, it'll just light this and the headlights. Being that they didn't really give us much of a cab, this piece here is going to take up most of the cab space. And then in the rear we've got the other LED mounted, and a lot of times I use super glue. I was kind of in a hurry for it to set up, which or I should say I use hot glue a lot of times. Today I use super glue on these to hold them in place. I don't use a lot because if you got to change them it's really hard, but the idea also is that it won't fall out. Okay, next we're going to look at a couple things on the frame. Alright, we're looking at the frame, and these Spectrums come with these cool little quarter people, I guess you'd call them. Normally they're blue, the color of the one arm there and the hat, so I gave them a safety green jacket and some flesh color and left their hats blue, and then I painted the back sides of their hair black. Probably details that probably won't show up very much through the engineer and fireman's window, but I'll know they're there. So I'm going to add those. And the other thing, well, I don't have anything to compare that with. I got my couplers rusted up in advance. These are what they call Kadee long shank center couplers. The shank here is longer than a normal Kadee by probably the length of the coupler itself, the coupler part here. And that gives locomotives, puts a little more distance between them, and it allows them to go around tighter curves, switches, and because my railroad has sharp curves, so I run long shank couplers on most of my 6-axle units. It also will stop a 6-axle unit from throwing the first car off on curves and going through switches. You do see a difference on them a little bit, but it makes them run better, and operation is really everything. So like I said, I pre-weathered them. I'm careful how much paint I get in that spring there or the hinge of it, so that they'll work. I paint they call it a trip pin, but I've always called it a brake hose. I paint those flat black, and I put a little bit of silver on the tip to represent the glad hand on the brake hose. So I'm going to be applying those to the frame and these guys, and then we're going to solder our LED leads from the shell. Now you'll notice the wires here, I left them kind of long. I also didn't neaten them up like I would normally, because I knew I was going to have to solder the rear headlights here, and the front headlights didn't have much in their way, but I kind of wanted to keep things still open so that I could get into them, and I'll try and neaten that up. So let me go get these things done, and we'll check back with it. Alright, we're looking at one of the couplers, the long shank Kadee coupler I've got mounted here. They're whisker couplers too, which is kind of cool. Alright, one thing about a snowplow, as I'm trying to manipulate the Kadee in one hand and hold, alrighty, when they couple together, see how the brake pin of the coupler in my hand is going to hit that snowplow? That'll cause things to uncouple. In fact, it's actually poking through the snowplow. How nice. That'll cause things to derail, to uncouple, and make a mess. In a second I'll show you the difference once I get the long shank coupler in there. Alright, looking at the couplers here, Now you can see that when it couples, the brake line or uncoupling pin of this coupler in my hand here does not come anywhere near hitting that plow now that it's got the, they're close but they won't hit it. Not like they did when we had the shorter coupler in there. So we certainly needed them in the front, and to ease things going around the curves on this layout, I often add them. That's going to look pretty cool. The only thing that it's really missing is some brake lines and a couple other little details, but I'm going to worry about them once we get her up and running. So next, the soldering iron should be hot so we can attach the LEDs. Alright, we are about ready. The wires, I got all the LEDs soldered in here, and the front ones are up here. And you'll notice I kind of kinked these wires, they're a little stiff. I figured out about where they should bend and have kinked them, and I say it like that because that doesn't always work. And you'll notice I've mounted my engineers front and the firemen, and we've got a little wire here that I'm going to have to do a little tweaking with the tweezers before I put the shell on, because I don't want that squeezed against that flywheel. That could be bad. And this guy's okay. That one's in really good shape. So we're going to check a little bit of that. We're going to check the other side, make sure we don't have wires where we don't want them. And we're going to close them up, and then we're going to test him. Alright, here we've got the shell on. Didn't have a lot of trouble getting the wires to cooperate. The shell went on pretty good. So we're going to fire it up, and hopefully the LED headlights will pop on there in a second here. So let's turn on the block and see what happens. So let's try to give us some light. Holy poop! Look at that! I done grabbed the LEDs for my caboose project and put them in the locomotive. Ah! Isn't that special now? So I'm assuming if we move her ahead, and we reverse direction, I'll bet you I got a blinking, look at that. What a pooper. Yeah, that about sums it up. Alright folks, so now I've got to go find some white LEDs and set that. I'm sure those were white, but guess what? They're I've got not. Both. Boy, I can't see that. There's the front LED, it's gluing away. And the rear LED is gluing away. And yes, this time I did test them before gluing them. Don't think I want to make that mistake twice. Ha! You know I will. Alright, we have hopefully recovered from the flashing red light headlight syndrome. What a pain that was. Hopefully this time we have bright white lights for headlights. Let's fire them up and see. Hey! Look at that! We got white headlights instead of flashing red. Now we'll try the rear headlight. See how that looks. Alright. Look at that. Alright. I just finished programming the locomotive with JMRI. I'm not going to go over it. I should make another video about that, but I'm not even really competent to give a video on that. But I made a bunch of sound changes. I'm very happy with our locomotive. And here we are with the sound unit 8688 and her running mate the 8667, the two units that started the whole project. I'm really happy with the way they came out here. let's have a little look here and see. Well, I thank you for watching my repower and adding sound and DCC to these old Bachman or Spectrum-8s. It was a fun project, and we had one major little flashing red blooper there. I've still got some detail work. I want to weather up the trucks. I want to do a little bit of added details. I've got some air brake lines I'm going to add to it, and just a couple of things like that. But until then, thanks for watching.